Over the years, I came to realize that that lesson was much more than a geometry lesson or a house construction lesson. It was a Bible lesson. It was a life lesson. I don't know when you're viewing this video, but it's the last one I'm publishing on this channel in 2024. And I decided to end the year with a tribute to my dad. Dad passed a couple months ago at the age of 91. He was a faithful Christian man that those of us who make it to heaven should get to meet someday. I'll share today something that was shared at his funeral service a few weeks ago. And while it is a tribute to my dad, it's also completely aligned with the purpose of this channel, which is to challenge ourselves to be the saints in God's kingdom that He desires us to be. Before I jump in, bear with me a few seconds while I show you a couple photographs of Dad. I enjoy photography and took my camera tripod and some lights when I went to visit Dad a few years ago. Dad was getting older, and I wanted a few photos of Dad in his natural environment that I could have as I grow older. Dad spent most of his spare time in the workshop out behind the house. Always had some project he was working on, and those projects were for someone else the vast majority of time. This is a picture of Dad posing for me in the middle of his workshop. I don't think he was crazy about the photo shoot, but he played along to humor me. And here's a photo of me and Dad together. And here's one of Dad, me, and my brother. It was a good day. I'll cherish these photos. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to today's topic. Turns out Dad could do a lot of things, and he did a lot of things. One of the things he did was to build a few houses from the ground up, and I literally mean from digging the foundation to framing and roofing the houses to hanging the sheetrock to laying the tile to installing the cabinets. One of the lessons that I learned came from helping Dad build the foundation of a particular house. I remember on this particular occasion when I was directly involved in this, Dad used the Pythagorean theorem to ensure the corners of the house were square. Since you all may not be geometry students in here, this theorem is that for a right angle triangle, the sum of the square of the sides of the right angle is equal to the square of the hypotenuse, or the long side of the triangle. Well, it turns out that there are a couple of pretty convenient number combinations you can use to do this. Those number combinations are 3, 4, and 5, or 5, 12, and 13. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Same thing with 5, 12, and 13. On this particular day, we were squaring up the corner of the foundation. So Dad measured 3 feet down from the corner on one side and made a mark. And then he measured 4 feet down on the other side and made a mark. Then when you measure from mark to mark at 5 feet, you know the corner is good and square. So Dad held the tape measure on one mark while I held it on the other mark. And when Dad asked me if it was 5 feet, I responded, "It's pretty close." Dad said, "I didn't ask you if it was close. I asked you if it was 5 feet. To which I once again responded, "It's pretty close." It quickly became clear this was not the right answer. Time for a little lesson. Dad explained to me that if the corner of the foundation isn't square, nothing in the house will be square. So the sheetrock won't fit, and the flooring will be square to one wall and have a gap on the other wall, and the cabinets won't hang right, and there'll be ugly gaps that will look bad. Dad explained that if the foundation wasn't square, it would cause problems in that house as long as that house was standing. So pretty close wasn't good enough. Square is square, and we weren't going to settle for anything less. He wasn't going to build a house and sell it to someone if it wasn't built right. And doing anything right always starts with the foundation. Now, just to be clear, Dad didn't come over and gently teach this. Dad was frustrated, and he taught me a direct lesson that day, but a lesson, in fact, needed to be taught. So we started again. And we took our time and we tweaked that corner, nudging it until that mark from dot to dot was dead on 5 feet. And that foundation was square. Over the years, I came to realize that that lesson was much more than a geometry lesson or a house construction lesson. It was a Bible lesson and a life lesson. You see, Dad wasn't the only one that talks about good foundation. Turns out Jesus talked about good foundations as well. He talked about the importance of a good foundation in the Sermon on the Mount. As a matter of fact, it's the way he concludes the Sermon on the Mount, the very last thing he mentions. He had at this point in the sermon talked about all kinds of stuff. It was countercultural stuff. He explained on a whole list of topics that the way they thought about things and the way they did things was going to have to change. You've heard it said, but I say. When you do these religious activities, don't do them like your current religious leaders do them. The whole sermon is chock full of change, of the need to take these externally focused things they did and make them based on their internal beliefs and values. And then in the last part of that sermon, Jesus gives some very serious warnings about the consequences of not making those changes and doing their religious activities based on the wrong motivations. And then he wraps up the whole thing by talking about the foundation all that stuff is based on. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 and 25, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock." On the rock. What is this rock? Jesus tells us at the start of this statement what that rock was. He says, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them." That's the rock. The message of Jesus and our obedience to that message is the rock. That is our firm, square, solid foundation. Hearing and doing the words of Jesus is our foundation. My dad didn't only teach me how to build a firm foundation for a house. He also taught me and my brother how to have a firm foundation in life. Dad wasn't attracted to foolish earthly wisdom or materialism or sports fanaticism or the many other things that so many of us seem to want to make the foundation of our lives. His life truly was grounded on the words of Jesus and putting those words into action. As we close out another video, let us examine ourselves. Let us ask ourselves, do I have a firm foundation? Am I grounded on that thing which will survive the wind and the flood and the rain? Or as I enter a new year, do I need to make some changes? Thanks for listening to my tribute to my father. I hope his life and the small lesson I've shared today will somehow bless you just like it did me for so many years. Thanks for listening. God bless you on your journey.